Hey, hello everybody. My name's Pete Lindner. I've been 30 years now with Legacy Carrier. I'm an Airbus 320 captain right now, flying with Tony this particular weekend. Based out of LA now, was out in New York for 20 years, which I happened to be at during the events of 9/11 back in 2001, as well as a 767 FO. So yeah, I also served in the Air National Guard for a total of 28 years, 25 plus flying the KC-135. And that's kind of the story I'm going to talk to you about today and what events that transpired on my 9/11. Everybody has a great 9/11 story. It's amazing to the people you talk to, and it's so vivid. It's that cutoff point in time that people separate one half of their life and the other half of their lives. So that's kind of where I start, is with the Air National Guard that day. But
And let me just say, on behalf of all of us here at Squawk Ident, thank you, sir, for your service.
it's my honor to be talking to you about it today. Thanks.
Yeah, and what I wanted to ask you was, what do you recall of the moment you first found out about the events that happened on September 11th?
The initial thought was disbelief. That was on the first airplane crash. And I can tell you what I was doing. I was actually flying an instructor flight in the KC-135. I was teaching, it happened to be our vice wing commander. I was checking him out on the airplane. And we were supposed to take off about 9:30. And if you recall, things started kicking off around 9 o'clock. So we were just about done with pre-flight, getting ready to start engines when the first plane hit the tower. And we got a note from our air traffic controlling agency at the guard base in New Jersey where I was stationed at. And they said, why don't you guys hold off for a second? We're having trouble with your flight plan through New York airspace. Okay. So we sit there, and then we get a call from our supervisor of flying who says, oh my gosh, there's been a second crash. First one we thought was an accident, second one not. Stand by. So that's kind of where that day began. I do remember, on a personal note, walking out the door that very morning at 5:30 in the morning, getting ready to go in to fly with the guard. And it was just such a beautiful day, Tony. It was calm winds, clear skies, perfect temperature. It was just a perfect day. And I remember stopping and going, wow, this is cool. So anyway, after that, so that was the first time I was aware that something happened. Then the supervisor of flying, the SOF, called us back up in about 9:40ish, and said, come on in, we got work for you guys. I'm like, oh, okay. So the time that I really noticed something was when we got into our little tiny bread van, which is how we travel in style in the Air Force, and we swing around the corner to the squadron, and there's a Humvee with 18-year-olds with machine guns and guarding our squadron. Like, that's different. And we have valets now? This is cool. So it turns out they shut down the whole base and brought in the guards to protect us, as we were now possible wartime assets. So that's how I first found out about it. Then as I walked into the building, of course, everybody's congregating in the TV room, and you could see it going on.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine. Here you were getting ready to go out on a sortie.
Just a day. I was earning money that day. It was more headhunter money. You know, it's coming in to do your job, to go to work. It wasn't a day meant to protect America or do anything else. It's just a day to fly and make some money. And it turned into a lot more than that. So
yeah. And I can only imagine, you know, we've spoken with pilots that, you know, were flying the line or were just coming off of a trip, and it was a huge change that happened almost instantaneously. And the tone of the country changed, I think. And you were a part of protecting it. And I mean, yeah. I can only imagine the confusion that was going through not just your mind, but all the members of the squadron. Like, what the heck's going on? Was there a lot of that?
Yeah, it was actually a fairly undermanned day. I think it was a Tuesday. I'm not sure, but I think it was like a Tuesday. So we didn't have a lot of people in. And it was just everybody in shock. All of us hanging out in that TV room going, wow, this is serious. And, you know, on a personal and a selfish point of view, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'd just gotten back from furlough in 1997. This is now 4 years later, and I'm seeing an attack against not only our country, but our airline. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how is this country going to continue? How is our airline going to continue? And that, again, is from a selfish point, not counting all the people that were directly affected by it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nearly 3,000 lives lost that day. 4 airliners destroyed from these acts of terrorism that we had never seen at this level on our soil before. What happened after, the moments after you've learned what had been going on and you were in the TV room watching it? What happened right after?
Well, things happened pretty quickly from there. So in our military world, our primary job was to be able to generate for nuclear alert. And that's KC-135s are pretty important in the nuclear triad in that they can extend the force. They can refuel the B-1s, the B-52s, as they continue their mission across the pond somewhere to drop their bombs. So that was kind of our whole role. And we had a minimum of probably 4 to 5 hours to get our aircraft up and running. And to do so is a whole set of checklists. It is quite an extensive thing, from fueling the plane to max fuel loads, to getting the engines into a quick start configuration, to putting blinds in front of all the windows so that the nuclear flash wouldn't blind anybody inside. We had other equipment too, that Blizzard goggles to protect from a nuclear flash. Even an eye patch was kind of the last line of defense to keep at least one eye available in the event that there's incomings. Now that's different from what we expected on 9/11, but we still had to prepare the aircraft to that level. So that's what we did, and we did it in record time, literally like less than 2 hours. Everybody was motivated, the fuelers, the maintenance folks, the pilots, the ground crews, everybody had everything up and running. We have a whole box of secret information which has codes, routes to fly for many, many different contingencies. So they can even change the mission mid-flight. And so you've got everything in these boxes, and our security people, our intelligence people had to come up with those boxes and have them all ready to roll. So it was quite the operation, and we worked as a team on a base-wide level, from the guys that were guarding our shack with the guns all the way to the guys that were preparing the secrets to us who were pre-flight in an airplane. So we had it up and running in just a 2-hour period, and we were brought out to this shack. It was basically probably a condemned trailer of some sort near the runway's edge, near our plane. And they put guard dogs and guards all around us, and that's where we sat. And we watched the rest of 9/11 Day portray itself out. And that's kind of where we sat up till we were eating M.R.Es, meals ready to eat. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's like 2,000 calories in a bag. Tastes good. So that's what we were eating. And in the meantime, also going on right now is a total recall for the base. They're calling every pilot, every maintenance guy. Guardsmen are typically part-timers, and they work anywhere from 2 days a month to 15 days a month. And so they have to be on call on a short notice, and they give them 3 days to reply and get in. So everybody now is converging or preparing to converge without aviation. So they could be stuck in Arizona, say, on a trip. Some of the pilots, they had to figure out a way to get across country in a matter of 3 days. So it took time without being able to travel by air. As you remember, the airlines were shut down basically for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that stood. And then, as I was going to say, the interesting thing to me is at 9 o'clock that night, we got a launch message. We're like, what? We're going to go to a nuclear war of some sort. And it was like, wow. It was pretty powerful.
Yeah. And I remember you telling me when we were talking earlier today that you actually ended up in that shack for, 4 days?
Yeah, 3 days, with one pair of underwear. Probably your viewers don't want to hear this. No toothbrush until the second night. And we had nothing. We got ourselves on duty, and while they're waiting for the slow recall of everybody across country, eventually somebody came to us and got us some food for the second night, as well as toothbrushes. And I think I did get a pair of some type of fancy underwear as a joke from one of our buddy pilots that was playing jokes on us. But I still have the pair of underwear, by the way. Again, something that people don't need to edit, cut.
That's great. That's good.
Any case, so that's
I
the
thought
funny
that was
part.
very interesting when you told me that you, because you would think that, okay, you got 8-hour shift and then you get to leave and you get replaced by your replacement. No, you were there for days.
Yeah, days.
Days.
And just on a side personal note, that morning I left, this is back in 2001, where we had giant brick cell phones that were not flips or not your Apples. And so I went out with like 2 bars that day thinking, all I have to do is call my wife and ask her what she wants on the way home from work. I'll be fine. Needless to say, by the time I talked to my parents and my sister, let them know I was okay, my cell phone was dead. So everybody friends and family that tried to call ended up talking to my wife, unfortunately. And I couldn't talk to her. We were in a trailer with walkie-talkies waiting for the order to go. So anyways, I said we did get a launch order. We went out. It's one time only that I ever in my 28-year career actually cracked open real sealed coded books, the real thing. We always have practice books and training books, but these were the real deal. And we're like, holy smokes, what are we doing? Yeah. So they backed us down, though, about literally 10, 15 minutes later. We just started, I think, maybe one engine of our 4 engines when we got the coded message to back down. And we came back in. We shut everything down, brought the codes all back in, and they said, go get some sleep. We're probably going to go in about 4 or 5 hours. And we're like, oh, yeah, I'll be able to sleep.
Yeah.
So that was just 5 more hours of sitting around, nervous, waiting what to do. It was a long day at that point. Now we're talking, 3 or 4 in the morning. Nothing happened. So I'm glad that things normalized, that we didn't just do a knee-jerk reaction and drop bombs for the sake of dropping bombs. If there had been a good target, I'm sure it would have been worthy. But I was happy to see that it didn't. And finally, my replacements came on day 3. They were able to stand us down, put a new crew on.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting 3 days. It was also a very quiet 3 days. I don't know if you recall, with no airplanes in the sky, you hear birds, you hear nothing. It's dead quiet.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah. And that's the first time since the dawn of aviation and the last time that we have had 0 flights in the air for an extended period of time in this country and around the world. And it's never happened since. It's
That's a great point.
An amazing tactical and an amazing protocol that was set in place, that was happening real time, that really the contingencies for this kind of a global event to happen was talked about in theory, but this is actually happening in real life. We had not a single radar trace in the sky. And that, I think, spoke volumes for the weeks to follow. I know we got back in the air within about 4 or 5 days.
Right.
They slowly started bringing back essential airline service and military service in the air, and then slowly started bringing back flight training and GA stuff in the weeks to come. But it was a slow trickle back to the air.
Right. Yes. And I will also agree that another strange thing or moment for me, because we were based at McGuire Air Force Base, which is central New Jersey, maybe 60 miles as the crow flies from New York City. And we could actually see the smoke, obviously, from the Twin Towers. And that was eerie, too, to be sitting out there on the porch of that trailer and seeing the smoke just billowing out.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine to be so close to it, and to be reminded constantly just by looking outside.
If I may diverge, you can cut this out at another time, but once we did get up and running and we started flying CAPs, Combat Air Patrols, over New York City and over Washington. And so it's being so close to that area, that was a common place for us to go up for 6 hours. Well, eventually, New York erected some towers of light. I don't know if you recall that, for the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, due to whatever plotting that the Central Command had, that was our orbit point.
Oh.
So if somebody had actually looked up for 6 hours at a time, we'd be orbiting right through those buildings. And I thought the message was horrendous if anybody saw that. But that is just the way it was. We did that as an emotional point for us, to make the epicenter of New York City, to be our orbit point. And I think a side effect was to see us flying through the light towers. It might have been an eerie effect if somebody had noticed it. I don't think anybody did.
I've never read about that. So, yeah. Now, the events of that day obviously has played an effect on you and your family in the months and years that followed. How long did it take for those events to kind of allow you all to feel normal again?
Well, it's still with me. That's for sure. That's definitely my cutoff point. Pre 9/11, post 9/11. My 3 children all went in the military, all 3 active duty. A daughter in the Navy, a son in the Army, and another son in the Air Force. So they all kind of were motivated by that whole turn of events. They were born in the early 90s, and I think they saw what I was going through, because I did get activated, and I did. In fact, just 2 months after 9/11, I was out sleeping in a tent in the desert with my 8 best friends in 120-degree heat and flying combat missions every day over Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So it was...
So you were in the thick of it.
I got to be a part, and I was proud and honored to be a part of it, and to help do our part, what little part we could do to help for not only the security, but to get back at the people that were in charge of this and had done this. In fact, I think I may have mentioned earlier that to you that I had actually flown the tail number of the aircraft that flew into the Pentagon. It was a 757 with the nose number of 5 BP. So we were all permitted to sign the bombs on the B-1 bombers at our base. So we were based out in the desert, and I had signed and have pictures of me with it, but I put the tail numbers of the aircraft that were used in the attack as well. And hopefully, in some small way, it vindicated it. It made me feel better, but it's good to be able to do that.
Yeah, get to participate in that way. Now, what changes? You were flying both in the airline industry and for Legacy Airlines, and you were a reservist that was activated. So you have both the military and civilian side experience behind you. Tell us a little bit how you remember flying experiences out on the airlines before 9/11 and how they dramatically changed after.
Yeah. Well, a couple things come to mind. The security aspect being probably the primary one. It used to be if you had a passenger acting up, the junior officer on the flight deck, which was pretty much always me, had to go back and reason with somebody who's angry and, screaming and yelling. Once 9/11 came along, that didn't happen anymore. There were rules that you either crossed the line and you were kicked off the plane, or other passengers would subdue you if required. It wasn't up to the lowly first officer to walk back there with his hat on and try and talk sense into a drunken individual. So that kind of was a big factor. The security was surprisingly naive prior to 9/11. I mean, everybody had a key to the cockpit. All the flight attendants did. You could just leave at any given time. If there was a 2-man flight crew and somebody had to go back and relieve themselves, they would just get up and go. And leaving just one person alone in the flight deck, and they didn't block off any corridors leading up to the restrooms. We were low fruit on the tree that day, unfortunately, and that did change, and I think that is a good change. And I don't think you're going to see that type of attack again, a hijacking. At least I hope not, but I think there's some great deterrences in place right now to prevent that. So those were the big changes. I think, funnily enough, when a flight attendant used to call up before 9/11, like a Pavlov dog, my stomach would growl, because that usually meant they had food. I'm thinking, it's time to eat. Nowadays, when a flight attendant calls, it's the same Pavlov experience, except I have to go to the bathroom, because the only time they ever come up is when we have to go to relieve ourselves at the restroom, and they bring somebody else up there. So those are small ways it's changed, but I think we're a better business now and a safer business, the way we take seriously our security at this point.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. The one thing I missed, and I don't know if anyone's mentioned this to you, is I miss when I was a kid, mid-flight, a flight attendant would come up and grab me and say, "You want to go say hi to the captain?" And mid-flight, they'd take me into the cockpit, and I'd sit there in awe and just look at all the buttons and the lights, and the pilots would turn around and go, "Oh, hi, what's your name? You think you want to fly one day?" Do you
Right.
like model airplanes? Have you ever seen a grown man naked? I mean, the typical questions that you would ask, and really was a big factor in why I had a passion for aviation is
Right.
because of those young age.
And now you love
flying.
gladiator movies, right?
Yeah, I absolutely love gladiator movies. And that just, it doesn't happen, not even during the boarding process. It just is so rare
Yeah.
to have a young person come up,
It's
and
a lot more sterile.
a lot more. And luckily, things did get a little bit better for a while. And now, you know, this current condition that we're in with this pandemic recovery, it's very few and far between where we have a
Right.
visitor on the flight deck before the flight or after the flight. But absolutely welcome them every time. That's one thing I miss is
I
that
agree.
and maybe it was naive to have that procedure available to us, but I really do miss that that time where you could do that.
Right.
It felt more like a privilege to fly, and that was it made it feel more special.
Right.
And now it just feels like it's you're on the bus, and
Right.
there's a security door there, and it's a bulletproof door, and don't go near the door.
Right.
You know, so times have definitely changed.
I do think that people feel more comfortable if they do get to talk to you and meet you ahead of time. I know we get to pick our surgeons when we have any minor procedures done. We get to pick our doctors. We get to pick a lot of things. You do not get to pick the pilots that are working your trip that day. So you don't know what you're getting. You know, they're all very well trained. I will say that to get to that level, they've been vetted and they've been through a lot of filters. So I don't think you're going to get a bad pilot for the most part. However, it is comforting for somebody sitting in the back who doesn't have control over what's going to happen that day to be able to at least put a face and maybe meet a personality who's behind the screen door there and who's going to fly the plane.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. So the whole purpose of us diving into these interviews with an attempt to understand the first-hand accounts to what happened 20 years ago. We've been asking, aviators that I've flown with in the past or that have been on the podcast in the past to give us a little bit of insight. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. Part of the inspiration to do this show was the fact that I realized that it's been 20 years and there are pilots out on the flight line right now that are working on their private instrument commercial ratings that are in their late teens, early 20s. There are pilots flying for regional carriers right now, flying a jet and a 121 operator that are in their early 20s that probably weren't able to understand the gravity of what was happening. They don't remember. And this is why I wanted to ask first-hand accounts. What would you tell a young aviator that is just starting out in the industry, this new generation of aviator that wasn't there 20 years ago or not able to experience it firsthand? What would you tell them about the significance of what happened on 9/11?
It was a day that I think the U.S. changed forever from being relatively naive. We didn't think we'd be struck on our own shores. We didn't think we'd be struck in such a horrific manner, as it turned out. Honestly, I have to say I'm a little disappointed at the way the country reacted. Nobody flew on airplanes. Nobody did things, and our whole industry took a major, major dive as a result of that. I think after I came back from multiple trips out towards Afghanistan to work with the Guard during multiple activations over the next year, people would come up to me and say, God, I wish I could do that too. I wish I could strike back at these people. And I'm thinking, you can. Take your family to Disneyland. Get on an airplane. Show them that you're not afraid, because that's what they wanted us to be, is afraid. And in that sense, they succeeded. And we could have all had played a hand in stopping that from being a successful part of their mission if we had all just went about business as normal, got back on planes, and went through those growing pains together as a country. I get it. Would I want to take my family on a plane immediately after? Well, I'm glad that the security procedures are in effect right now. Let's put it that way. Yeah. But that would have been a way we could have sent a message, I think, as a whole. In terms of the aviation thing, if I can throw a plug out for the Air National Guard, it is a great place to start if you are looking to build a career in flying. They'll take you through pilot training. You'll get to meet guys from all kinds of different airlines once you get on board with a Guard unit. It's a great camaraderie. And we got to take part in something real historical. It was very magical looking back, to sleep in a tent in the desert, sleep for 10 hours, get up and fly for 12, sleep for 10, get up and fly for 12. You had a purpose, and it was really very gratifying. It was probably one of the best things in my entire flying career of 35 or 30. I guess I'm getting older than I thought. Almost 40 years now. So anyway, just throwing a plug out for the Guard.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will put a link in the show notes for the Air National Guard, and people can take a look and get more information about that as well. Well, Pete, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today. This is a very, very special show for us. And, your experience when we flew together this morning for the first time, meeting each other out of Ontario, California, and flying. We did a trip Ontario to Dallas and then Dallas to Las Vegas, where we are now.
And Tony had a better landing than me, darn it.
Yeah, well, even a blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while. But, just to hear your story, and I was telling you a little bit about what I'm working on, and I'm just so grateful that.
Thank you. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I'm honored that you're interested in my humble portion of that story. So
absolutely.
Thanks.